Excellent. All right, thank you first of all for everyone for coming to Stack Overflow. It's always good to have Stackup here. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit differently about management, and I'm really going to be talking about hiring quite a bit in the context of management. I'll say a lot more about this in the next few minutes, but we really think of that hiring as a really core part of the way that we do management in a way that I think is a little bit more unique to Stack Overflow than a lot of other organizations may see. So a little bit about myself first. Here at Stack Overflow, I'm the marketing engineering lead, very equivalent to what may be like a team lead. It's a very, very new team here at Stack Overflow. So essentially, I'm managing myself, but hiring aggressively right now. But basically what it is that I do is I think about all the engineering support for the Stack Overflow brand. And really what that means is that I think a lot about content, what people are thinking about when they think about Stack Overflow, and especially around growth and acquisition across all of our products. That includes for our customers as well as for our developer community. As an aside too, I'm also the founder of a side sort of a passion project called Bento. You may have heard about it. And I build a lot of tools for self-taught developers. So I think a lot also about how people learn, especially for beginners and new developers. So a bit of an overview about what we're going to be talking about today. The first is really about the philosophy here. And this is talking a little bit more about what I mean when I say hiring as management. We think a lot about what it means to be a manager at Stack Overflow, and a lot of those values that we take on a regular basis really translates a lot into how we hire as well. So I'll be talking about that first. The second is actually what the interview process is like for developers on the engineering team. We have a very replicable process that we think about on a constant basis that every engineer at Stack Overflow is actually invested in. And then lastly, we'll also talk about performance, and that includes onboarding as well as figuring out how developers are progressing while they're with us at Stack Overflow. And then at the end, of course, questions. If there's some things I miss, I wanted to talk about everything related to engineering management, but we can't really do that in 10 to 15 minutes. So if there's something I miss, feel free to reach out to me at John H. M. Chan at Twitter or just at john@stackoverflow.com. I'm probably never going to get a better email address than that for a really long time, so please email me things. Okay, so first section of things, philosophy. This is, again, sort of talking about why we think about hiring as management here. And there's two major parts to this that I'm going to talk about. First is what Joel Spolsky, our CEO, calls pluralism, which is sort of our philosophy management. And also a little bit about our remote culture, which is also very core to what we think is important to Stack Overflow. So a little bit more just contextually here about Stack Overflow logistically. We're about 250 people, I think a little bit over that as of this year, and we're distributed across the world. We have headquarters here in New York City, but also two largely sales offices in Denver and in London. The engineering organization as a whole has about 55 people, but that doesn't just include developers, that also includes our site reliability engineers, designers, as well as product managers as well. And generally, we have three layers of management after the CEO. We have our VP of engineering, and then sort of a middle layer there with managers and team leads, and then final individual contributors, actual individual designers, developers, site reliability engineers, etc. So pluralism. So this is what we sort of give the name to our philosophy management, and this is really something that has been championed by our CEO, Joel Spolsky. And he talks a lot about the history of management here. And he thinks that we are at sort of a crossroads here where we've had what he calls achievement organizations, where you're really thinking about, well, how do people innovate, right? And what we're talking about when we say pluralism is that the ultimate thing to understand about that is how we think about what managers' roles are, and that they're really a support role here at Stack Overflow. A manager here is not going to tell you what project to work at. Joel isn't necessarily going to say, hey, I want you to think about rejiggering reputation, for example. It is also not an engineering manager's job to do that either. But really it is a manager's job to think about, well, what are the obstacles that are in your way? How do I actually help somebody that I am managing get the things that they need to get done? And so we loosely call this philosophy of management pluralism at Stack Overflow. We really think about managers not to tell you what to do, but really to make sure that you are in a support role there. And what that sometimes translates into is that our engineering managers don't code. They don't necessarily push code on a regular basis. Sometimes they do, but really it is your job to think about the people that you are managing and what obstacles you can remove out of their way. Now, a personal interpretation of pluralism, and this is sort of my personal take on pluralism, is really thinking about Stack Overflow as an empowerment organization. So you can generally sort of put people into three buckets based on their ability to empower. Sort of people's ability to force multiply, somebody's individual contributions, experts, people that are actually doing that individual contribution, and then the people that you generally probably don't want in your organization, which is around net negatives. You know, if you were really to think about sort of if you were to sort of quantify a person's ability to contribute to an organization, you can sort of give it an arbitrary amount. Say an engineer is, you know, this isn't exactly an accurate metric for this, but say they can add plus 10 arbitrary productivity points there. You could work as an engineer to become better at coding, which would make you go from plus 10 to plus 30 for the organization. But as an engineering manager, that is not necessarily your job. Because what you could be doing as an engineering manager isn't going from plus 10 to plus 50. Your job is actually to increase the total output and productivity of all the people you're managing by 20%, say. That individual contribution as a manager is far more than you could actually do becoming a better developer. And that's sort of the way that you might think about when we think about empowerment organizations, and a personal interpretation that I have about what pluralism means. Negatives are exactly what they sound like. They are actually those that actually bring down the people that are around them, you know, by 20%. And those are the people that you avoid when you want to be able to do projects. These are the people that you work around when you have to do that. So when you think about, you know, an empowerment organization and pluralism, you can sort of think about it in those three things. And what is sort of a result of that is that you can really think about two different dimensions for somebody. Somebody that is really thinking about the craft and their skill. Am I a better developer? Am I a better marketer? Am I a better designer? And also somebody on a different dimension, which is how well can I empower people? How well can I manage people? How well can I actually get obstacles out of the way? And this isn't specific to engineers, and what this really translates to is that we really, really, really trust our developers a lot. Because managers are not telling you to do what to do every single day, we really push decisions out into the leaves of the organization as opposed to centralize them in specific places. Now, I'm going to say a little bit about remote too, because like I said, we have 3 different offices, but we're distributed around the world. You know, we've been distributed from day one. Our co-founders, Joel and Jeff, they were in different parts of the country when they started this company. And we've stayed that way largely. We're a quarter remote overall, and the development team is about 65% remote. And we really believe in this. You know, it vastly increases the hiring pool for us. So that means that we're not limited to a 50-mile radius of any of our headquarters, and provides a really flexible schedule and, of course, quote-unquote private office at your home. Now, with both of those things in mind, you think about pluralism and think about empowerment and also think about remote. You can also sort of think about that translating into how we think about hiring. Because we are trusting developers so much, we really are optimizing for 2 things that we say all the time, and that people are smart and that they get things done. And when it comes down to those 2 things, you can really allow for those developers to really take a really big part in how they will actually manage around the organization and really be independent within Stack Overflow. So let me go into sort of what their interview process is. And this is, again, a shortened version of what it is that we're talking about, but I'll go over what some of these pieces here. So 5 really quick things. First, binary hire. We have a hire or no hire policy. There isn't a maybe. Maybes are a no. That's generally the way that we want to do it because we want to avoid false positives when we are actually hiring for people. Second, veto power. Pretty much along the entire process, if anyone gets a no hire, they're generally out of the process. At any one point in time, for example, somebody may not be able to pass an architecture interview. When they're no hire there, they're usually out of the process, even if they have other interviews lined up in front of them on the same day. That happens as well. Full stack, we pretty much just hire full stack developers. That generally means that we can trust those developers to take a site from end to end. That if, they may not necessarily be an expert at every single one of those pieces, but if we wanted to throw a particular problem like a database at them, then they could actually pick that up if they needed to. Generally, also that we generally hire what would be considered senior developers at any other company. Again, what we sort of really mean here is that you don't need someone to be babysitting them. They can really be taken as a developer and really just go forward with a project. You hand them a problem, they can take it from end to end. And lastly, when it comes to backgrounds, we're generally language and education agnostic, right? We don't care if you know C# and .NET, which is what our typical stack is when you come in here. When I started here at Stack Overflow, I was mostly a Python, Mongo, didn't really use a Microsoft machine for a very long time, and I completely changed sides on pretty much every age-old war on a technology stack. And also education agnostic. We don't really care whether or not you have a CS degree as long as you have the requisite experience and the skills there. So, overall process here when it comes to developer interviews generally falls into 4 stages here. The first is the resume review, the basic screen, sort of the full portion of interviews here, and then lastly the VP interview. I'm only going to highlight a few pieces here as opposed to go to every single one, because then you'll be here for an hour with me. But the few things that I am going to talk about are the developer interview, the code screen, and then go really quickly through some of the highlights on the second portion. Okay, first, resume review. So when we get resumes at Stack Overflow, and we get a lot of them on a pretty much a daily basis, we have a very standard way of doing reviews for those resumes, and we have this acronym called TEDPG. And the TEDPG stands for Targeted, Experience, Technical Depth on the D, Passion, and Gets Things Done. And basically, if somebody has 4 out of the 5 of these things, then they pass a resume review. So I'll talk about a little bit about each one of these. First is targeted. We want to make sure that developers really, really love Stack Overflow. We can usually safely assume that most developers know what Stack Overflow is, but we want to be able to see that they really do love and care about Stack Overflow. And that usually just translates to 1 or 2 sentences on the cover letter. It isn't just a copy and paste cover letter that they're sending to us. And of course, if they have 10K reputation, we know that they're invested in the community. So that would be an automatic yes. The next is actually experience. We want to be able to see that someone has actual full-stack developer experience. And that the sort of rule that we have here is that it's 4,000 hours. And that roughly translates to about 2 years full-time over the last 5 years that they've done full-stack web development experience. This can also count, if they're in college, for example, and they're actually working on a CS degree or they have their own projects. That can count too, but it has to be actual time spent coding, not writing papers or doing anything else like that. The next is technical depth. So in addition to actual just time put in, we also want to see that developers that want to be at Stack Overflow are also thinking about really hard technical problems. Did you build your own web server? Are you thinking about creating your own Regex engine? Did you try and do a really hard technical problem and talk about it? The next thing is passion. And this is separate for passion for Stack Overflow. This is thinking about, are you excited about development and engineering? Do you contribute to open source, 50 plus commits? Are you 10,000 rep or more on Stack Overflow? Do you do a lot of talks about technical pieces? And the last thing is gets things done, which I've mentioned a little bit before, but this is really about, can someone lead a team? Are they somebody that people ask questions to? Can they actually take something end to end here? And again, if you get 4 out of 5, you typically pass the resume review. Okay, so I'll also talk a little bit about the code screen, and you can take a lot of the ideas that I'm talking about here in the code screen for a lot of the other pieces of our technical interview. And this is sort of what a typical code screen that I would give would look like, right? It's about 30 minutes. And the next is sort of like, okay, introduction, who am I, how this is going to work. And one of the things that we want to be able to really highlight here is that we want developers to think out loud when they are actually coding with us. The thing that we are optimizing for isn't necessarily whether you get the right solution or not, but really how you think about technical problems. That's what we really want to be able to see. The next thing that we do is a warm-up question. And this is something that, can a developer code their way out of a paper bag kind of thing? FizzBuzz, for example, is an example of something that we might ask. And this is really just to warm up a developer, right? We want to make sure that they're not too nervous, that they can get their juices flowing and go from there. And then, of course, there's a meteor question here. And one of the things that I want to sort of emphasize here when I think about these questions is that it's a question that everyone can understand, but not everyone can solve. So if I were to ask somebody to implement a red-black tree, for example, I remember when I was interviewing at the very beginning, I was afraid of questions like this, like, I don't even know what that is, because I don't have a CS degree. But if I were to ask you, hey, I want you to implement, Minesweeper, or if I want you to implement whether or not there's going to be a full house in a deck of cards, you can generally understand what that kind of question means, but it's certainly not the kind of question that everyone can actually answer. And then lastly, of course, is just if they have any questions at all. And this is something that, for me, I generally don't judge at all what kind of questions they ask. I will pretty much, we are default public. We will tell you anything short of long-term business strategy and financial numbers, unless, they just maybe don't ask any questions because it might be an indicator of passion for Stack Overflow. Now, the rest, again, just this, you can take a lot of the things that I talked about before and really apply them through here. There's 2 other major technical interviews that we have here. Next is the hard technical interview. And this is, one step harder than the original code screen, right? And this is usually really hard programming concepts like recursion, pointers, low-level hardware pieces sometimes that really test a developer's ability to code and think about technical issues. And the next is sort of an architecture interview, which really tests for full stack understanding. All 3 parts of the tier, front end, back end, database. We just want to make sure that they can think about a problem from a global perspective. And the last is the VP interview. If you get past all of that and get to the VP interview, you're generally inside of at Stack Overflow. Really what we're doing there is filling in any gaps when it comes to public notes from all your previous sort of developer interviews, team fit, which team you should go into, what we're going to be working on, and of course selling the actual opportunity to that developer. All right, last section here, and that's really about performance. And I'm going to talk about this in terms of 3 major sections here. The first is really about onboarding and something that we call Stack University. You know, we want to be able to make sure that people are primed to perform really well and succeed within the organization once they actually get in. The next is a little bit in terms of weekly updates or understandings of how is somebody doing along the process once they're actually with us. And then lastly is sort of around salaries and performance. So the first thing I'll talk about is Stack University, and this is basically a very standard checklist that we have that takes roughly 6 to 8 weeks for a new developer to get onto. The other thing that's also really important is that we assign a mentor that is on that team with that person that is actually starting with us, and they take care of a lot of the logistical pieces like scheduling 30-minute chats or actually being the first point of contact when they have questions. And that standard checklist really covers pretty much everything that you'd expect a developer to know when they first start here. First is just overall company policies. Hey, what is chat? Where do I find typical HR pieces, etc. The next is machine setup and sort of making sure that developers get a day one push to production. We have automated dev setup here, that we've been working on quite a bit, that we actively maintain, and we think it's really important that developers actually push code on their first day. Optionally, they also do a ping pong app, and this is typically for developers that actually don't have familiarity in our stack. Like for me, for example, when I first started here, I did not know C#, so you may spend your first week or two trying to build a full stack project that's pretty small, and typically something like a ping pong tracker for games and people that win, for our own ping pong table, for example. And then the rest of it is really consisting, the bulk of it is a lot of 30-minute chats, and this is about speaking to specific team leads or people that are, subject matter experts in a particular part of our code base, like geocoding, for example. That's one I used to do for a really long time. And then another thing that we actually do about 5 weeks into the actual onboarding here is we put them into something called bug duty. The way that we sort of manage sort of smaller pieces of technical debt and bugs is that every developer goes on essentially a rotation within their team to just fully dedicate about 2 weeks just to bugs, right? That way there's always someone full-time thinking about what bugs are actually coming up. And it also provides us a really great onboarding experience, getting developers into a really dark, scary place in the code. That really gives you breadth across the entire code base as opposed to thinking about a specific problem. And then the last thing that we do here is that it's what's called a graduation project. So we have developers think about an idea that they have, a feature perhaps on Q&A. They send out what's called an RFC or a proposal to the rest of the engineering team and really build out an entire feature to completion completely on their own on a separate branch, and then they do a demo for us. And that's pretty much what the entire onboarding process looks like. So weekly updates. So this is also just, once they're actually done with the onboarding, how do we actually make sure that people are continuing to do the work that they're doing? And this is something that we've done pretty much since the inception of Stack Overflow. We have an agile-like approach to product development, pretty much on a weekly basis. And what that usually translates into is a weekly meeting amongst your team. The standard format for what that update looks like is, what did you do last week? What are you doing this week? And discussion items, things that you might want to bring up around like infrastructure, for example, or maybe a problem that affects the entire team. And when it comes to actual tools, this is some mixture of Google Docs and Trello, depending on which team that you're on. Additionally, there may be some sort of PM-driven processes in here. Say that you're on a much larger project that maybe spans multiple teams. You may also have a weekly update around that, and typically those are in Trello, for example. So just to give you an idea of what that might look like on sort of a weekly update, this is what a doc might typically look like where, okay, last week, hey, John, this is what I did. I built out feature X for project A. I gave a talk about diversity and inclusion. And this week, I'm planning on doing 2 developer interviews, internal testing for feature X, and discussion. Let's talk about tabs versus spaces, for example, right? This is what would happen for every single developer when they're actually going into the weekly update. They would fill this out, and then each person would go do a round robin and talk about what they're doing. There's also a variation here, which is around Trello. If any of you have used Trello, it's a very Kanban-style management tool for pretty much anything that you'd really need. This usually divides up into like a 4-call section where anybody can put in cards about what it is that they want to discuss amongst the entire team, what they're currently working on, so things that get in 4-call, moved into working on, and then as things get done, moved into done. Optionally, some places also do round robin as well, just to make sure that we're not filtering out people that aren't necessarily speaking up. We can also provide for that too. Now, when it comes to thinking about all those processes as a whole, then we actually come down to salaries and performance. And when it comes to these pieces, we actually center around this thing that we call the Be More Awesome chart. And what the Be More Awesome chart is really, it's a standard rubric to assess someone's skills that we call the BMA. And this happens about every 6 months. The 6 months check-in, it doesn't mean that every single time that we actually do this assessment that it actually is going to affect your salary per se. That happens on an annual basis, but we do want to be able to give sort of a mid-year check-in. Now, every single skill that we have on this Be More Awesome chart is graded anywhere from a B to an A triple plus. And the kind of skills that we're thinking about here, some of them are generic across the entire engineering organization. Some of these examples I'll actually give in the next slide. But there are also sort of role-specific ones as well. If you're a web developer, for example, we want to be able to see that there's a skill on your chart which is about .NET programming. Our stack is in .NET. We want to see what your proficiency there is. Or if you're, say, on a designer, for example, we want to be able to see what your UX, UI understanding is. There's a general sort of core all engineering rubric that are around certain things, and I'll go into that next, but also variations of that depending on what your role are. And I'll say a little bit more about what the B to A triple plus is, like why doesn't it start from F to A, for example. The expectation here really is that we expect everyone to be operating at a B level. That means above average here. Like I said before, we really are optimizing for senior developers, for example. And a B is sort of what you'd expect is the case if they need a little bit more improvement. An A is actually what we'd expect everyone at the team to be at. An A triple plus really means that you're outstanding, almost known within your field for that particular thing. And now when we actually take all of those skills together, we plug them in. Sorry?
Is there one key thing you want to touch on before we jump to questions?
Yeah, sure. So pretty much the last thing is that this really just translates into an actual salary. So you can actually plug in those skills with mixed with experience, role, adjustments, and that's completely transparent. If you want to take a look at that later, we're actually going to release something really cool tomorrow, and you'll probably hear about it later on. And that's pretty much it. I was just going to give you a little bit of an overview about what some of those pieces are, and then go into questions.